about the story of David and Goliath. Now, this story is a story that you're probably used to studying from the viewpoint of talking about things that, like, how big this giant is and how small that David was, and, how that David killed Goliath with a sling and a stone, and the details like that about the story. And we're going to go into this story a little bit tonight from a little bit of a different perspective and study it a little bit more deep. But first, we're going to do a little bit of lengthy reading. And I guess since all of my brothers and sisters who don't want to use microphones are here tonight, I will do all the reading. Okay, we're going to start. It's 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going to just start at verse 3. And we're going to read basically this whole entire chapter, so it's going to be long, like I said. It says, "And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side. And there was a valley between them, and there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass, and he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders." Now, I'll just enlighten you there, although this isn't really what we're studying about, but in case you don't know, in my studying and listening to preaching and things I've been doing about this story for the last several days, I found out that, Goliath is over 9 feet tall, possibly maybe even somewhere between 9 and 12 feet tall. I'm not real clear exactly how tall he was, but at any rate, if he was 9 feet tall, he was pretty tall compared to anybody here tonight. And his suit of armor would have weighed better than 200 pounds, probably much better than 200 pounds. And it says, "And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spearhead's weight was 600 shekels of iron, which is about 25 pounds. And one bearing a shield went before him, and he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am I not a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight together." He was saying, I want a one-on-one fight. He thought in his mind that there wasn't really anybody that could come up against him that could really beat him. That's why he was so confident. And that's why I believe he was so confident, being that he was considered a giant, and knowing that everyone in the Israelite army was basically intimidated by him. So when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse. And he had 8 sons, Jesse did. And the man went among men, for an old man in the day of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle. And the names of the 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliab, and I'm just I'm just throwing these names out there because you know they're kind of hard to pronounce, but say it with confidence. That's what the pastor says, right? Okay, that was the firstborn son, Eliab. And next unto him, Abinadab. And the third, Shema. And David was the youngest son. And I really like the fact that David's name is easy to say because I have to say it a lot. So that's nice. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. This is a part about this story that I don't know if maybe we just don't talk about it too much, or maybe we talk about it, but all the other details of the story kind of overshadow this part. But I guess it was kind of new to me. But it says, and the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, take now for thy brethren an ephah and of this parched corn and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren, and carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. So what he was saying here is, imagine this picture. On one hillside, you have Goliath and his army, and on another hillside, you have the Israelites and their army, and there's this valley, of course, between them. And Goliath presents himself. In other words, he comes down into the valley every day twice, and he basically tells them, I'm ready to fight, and I want somebody to fight. Send me a man to fight, more or less. So David is being sent down by his father to take food to his brothers and to check in on them and bring back a report to his father, Jesse, about how his brothers are doing. Okay, that's what's going on right here in this part of the story. It says, now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with the keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper and of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up a champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words. And David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king, will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, so shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. So he was saying to David, you are not here for the right reason. You don't even basically need to be here. All you did was come down here to see us fight. Right?
Mm-hmm.
In just a few words. And David said, what have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from toward another, and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion, and there came a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with thee. So basically, Saul was like, all right, kid, if you are really set against, you're going to do this, then just go and do it. Godspeed to you, because you're just a little guy, and this guy here you're going up against is, 5 times your size.
Right.
Or whatever. But he says, basically, go, David, more power to you if you think you can do it. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail, and David girded his sword up on his armor. And he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off of him. In other words, David didn't want to wear that armor. Okay? He said, this is not what I need. This is not what I'm not used to this. Whatever, I don't want to wear this. So I'm taking it off. So he took it off, which seems to be really brave of David, but he was set to the fact that he wasn't wearing the armor. So it says, and he took his staff in his hand, and he chose him 5 smooth stones out of a brook, and he put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had even in a script. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. And the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. Now, notice that Goliath had somebody with a shield that went before him. Now, I just want you to think about that for a minute. I'm not sure if there's some kind of maybe historical significance, and maybe that's just the way that they've done things. I'm really not sure. I'm not really a biblical scholar or anything. But I think it's kind of funny or odd that this giant is a coward enough to, even though he's charging and he's saying, send me somebody to fight, he has somebody to go before him with a shield. I just thought that stuck out to me, and I thought it was funny. So I wanted to point it out. Okay, and then it says, and when the Philistine looked about and he saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, am I a dog, thou comest to me with staves or sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give thy flesh to the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and I will take thine head from thee. And I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with a sword and a spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass that when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead. And that stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. Okay, that's where we're going to stop. That was a lot. But I read all that because I have several points that I want to bring out in the story from where I read to where I stopped. I actually did a lot of studying and listening to other people's take on the story of David and Goliath in order to... God's been speaking to me. Last time God spoke to me about corn, and it was kind of simple, but there was a point to it. This time God kept bringing giants up in my head. And it seems like that in this year, we have all faced a lot of what we might call giants, okay, in the spirit realm, or sometimes maybe in the physical realm, although you wouldn't call it a giant that was depicted such as what Goliath was depicted. But we come up in our lives against giants all the time, don't we? And we're meant to be victorious over those giants. So we're going to start here at the beginning, and we're going to pull out several points about how, in the illustration of this story, how we can also see a parallel of an illustration of the life of Jesus Christ in the story of David and Goliath. And whenever my mind is blown really easily, so this might not blow your mind at all, but I was kind of, I was like, wow, whenever I was listening to this being taught about, and I was like, well, you know, I was thinking about going along a storyline of, you know, the traditional way of talking about David and Goliath, and talking about the mountains that we face and the giants that we face. But this gave me a new perspective, and I was like, that's what I have to talk about. That's what God is wanting me to talk about. So here we go. Point number one. Well, first I just want to say that I think I already did say it, but this story of David and Goliath proves to us that we are supposed to be victorious over all giants that we face in our life, no matter what. It is ordained by God that we are victorious. We know, you hear people say it all the time, we know what the back of the book says and we win, right? So no matter what small things you might face in your life that seem like a huge battle to you, but when you look back on it after it happened, you would say that really wasn't that bad, but God helped me through it. No matter how big or how small it is, God intends for you to be victorious in the situations that you face. Okay, point number one. It's important to notice that David is anointed, and we remember a part in the Bible that tells us in Samuel chapter 16 verse 11 through 13 that David was anointed, right? Brother Frank, will you look that verse up and read it to us? It's 1 Samuel chapter 16 verse 11 through 13.
All right. And Samuel said unto Jesse, hear all thy children. He said, There remaineth, yea, the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look at. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he.
Okay.
Then
That's good. Okay, so we know, because the word tells us that David was anointed to do what God had ordained him to do, and he was young, but he was anointed nonetheless, right? And we also know that Jesus was anointed. In fact, we know that the word Christ in the Greek, which would be pronounced Christos, I believe, it means literally the anointed one. So both David and Jesus alike were anointed. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make parallels, illustrations or parallels about how we can see Jesus in this story of David and Goliath, okay? So that's point number one. Also, just something that I thought of on my own that nobody really threw in, but I thought of it myself. Both David and Jesus were keepers of sheep, right? David, he took care of his father's sheep. The story tells us that he had left the field of taking care of the sheep, his father's sheep, to go and take the food to his brothers. And we know that Jesus talks about, being the shepherd, the good shepherd, the one that takes care of the sheep. And we know that we talk about that he would leave the 99 to go find the one that was lost. So we know that Jesus is also a shepherd. Point number two. We kindly look at it maybe a little differently than some people, but nonetheless, both David and Jesus were sent to do what they done by their fathers. In the story of David and Goliath, David was sent, like I just said, to go take food to his brothers. His father told him to do it. And we know that God, the Father, sent Jesus to the earth to do what he done for us, right? And Jesus also, you could say, in the spiritual sense, he calls himself, in John 6:48, he says, I am the bread of life. In John 6:33, he says, for the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. So we know that David took bread to his brothers, and Jesus brought bread to his brothers, to us as well, right? So, those are just some interesting little points. The third point is that David hears the king say that there would be a treasure, that there would be basically the person who would kill the giant, who would kill Goliath, there would be something for him, and those things were that he would be rich, that he would be, his family would be free, basically, and that he would also be given a bride. And that's all in the story of David and Goliath. And also we can see a parallel with Jesus, that Jesus also would seek a treasure. And the treasure that Jesus was after, that compelled him to the cross, was the bride that he is searching for, which is you and me. We are his bride. David would also attain a bride, like we said. He wanted to basically win the opportunity to take us as his bride. He wants to make us free from the bondage of service to sin and give us an inheritance of his greatest riches. Are you seeing what I'm saying? Am I making sense here? So I'm hoping I'm not making any sense. Okay, the fourth point is that David was scorned and mocked by his brothers for coming to see the battle that he was sent down to check on them for. But they accused him, when he said he would fight, they accused him of just wanting to be there to see what was going on. Kind of treated him pretty bad, being that, his original intent was to bring them food to sustain their lives. Jesus, on his mission to bring us salvation, was also mocked. And Luke chapter 23 says that people said to Jesus, "He saved others, let him save himself if he is the Christ, the chosen of God." And then in another place it says, "If you are the King of the Jews, then save yourself." Jesus was continually mocked while he was on his mission to do what God intended for him to do. And then there's another point that before David fought Goliath and before Jesus went to the cross, they were both strengthened by their experiences in their previous battles. David, if you'll remember the part that I just read, he said, "The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine." And Jesus, we know that he was in a spiritual battle. For 40 days, I know the Bible says that he was tempted at all points as we are. And he went into the wilderness, and the entire time he was basically fighting that spiritual battle. He was basically preparing himself for what he was going up against, which was to take the sin of the world upon his shoulders. And so he was in battle. And all throughout his life, Jesus, would face, like, people saying things to him, like, especially like when he was, right before he was getting ready to be crucified, they were telling him, "You're not who you say you are," and that's the whole reason they even wanted to crucify him. So he was mocked and he was scorned, as David was mocked and he was scorned when he went down to fight the battle. They were two different battles, obviously. David was going to fight this Philistine, and Jesus was going to fight this battle of sin, and he was going to win. He was going to take back the keys of death and hell, but they were both in a battle of sorts, right? Okay, point number 6. David chose not to use typical armor to fight against his enemy. We remember the part of the story where they put the armor on him, and he said, "No, I can't wear this armor. It's not what I'm prepared to do. It's not how I'm used to doing things," right? But I would submit to you that David did have on armor that day, but it was that spiritual armor that we're instructed to put on every day. Because it's evident that David did have on his spiritual armor. He had lots of faith that when he went out to face this giant, that there was no doubt that he would defeat the giant, right? He knew that God would see him through the battle. He knew that he would be victorious, but he did not choose to go into the battle as a traditional warrior would go. In fact, he wasn't even a traditional warrior himself as a youth. He wasn't the person that anyone thought would defeat Goliath. So, likewise, Jesus didn't choose to wage war on sin by coming to earth and posing as a mighty, powerful king. But he was such. He just didn't show it forth. He didn't come. He came how? How did he originally come? He came as a baby. He started out the lowest and most vulnerable that he could here on the earth. And then as he grew, he still didn't sit around on a throne with a crown on his head. He chose to be a servant. And that's likely a lot. Well, I would think in my mind, you know, if you are used to having a leader that's a king that, you know, is the powerful one sitting on the throne, in your mind, if you paint the picture of what a king really looks like, you don't think of him as the person, you know, running around, washing people's feet, preaching to people, taking them food. You know what I'm saying? That's not the picture you get. So, he was constantly questioned about his kingship. And Philippians 2 tells us that he made himself of no reputation. So, although neither Jesus nor David held up the reputation of a traditional king, they were both victorious nonetheless. Point number 7, both David and Jesus used the enemy's weapons against them. This one really, I mean, it's an obvious statement, but when you really think about it, it's so true and it's very powerful. And it puts the parallel of the story of David and the story of Jesus. To me, it's one of my favorite parts. Both David and Jesus used the enemy's weapon against them. Well, how did they do that? Well, we know that David used Goliath's own sword to cut off his head, right? Because David didn't take a sword. All he had was the sling and the stones, right? But Goliath, he had all of that stuff. Obviously, Goliath didn't have his sword drawn to get ready to, you know, chop David's head off or whatever, because it was in his sheath, and David took it out of his sheath and cut his head off with it. So he used Goliath's own weapon to do him in completely, to solidify that he wasn't getting back up and he wasn't taking control again. Okay, now I'm going to try to say this without being confusing about it. So we know that the devil wanted to kill Jesus. He was like, if I can just get rid of him, then I don't have to worry about it anymore, right? So the cross, whenever Jesus was going to the cross, I'm sure the devil thought, oh, this is great, you know. He's going to be gone and I don't have to worry with him anymore, right? However, Jesus chose to go to the cross. Nobody made him do it, but he chose to do it. He could have, like you've heard, he could have called on the angels. He could have gotten out of the situation, but he chose not to get out of the situation. He chose to go to the cross, and by doing so, he used the cross that he died on, to seal the fate of Satan when he died and took back the keys of death and hell. So Satan thought he's going to kill Jesus because Jesus is going to go hang on this cross and then he's going to be done. But whenever he actually done that, that same cross was what sealed the fate for Satan. It's what took his power and his ability to actually keep people in the bondage of sin. Now there's a way out. He didn't realize what he was really trying to accomplish, or probably, I would say that he wouldn't have been working so hard at it, right? And then the last point that I want to bring out is that David defeated Goliath all by himself. Nobody else was out there saying, we've got your back, David, you know. In fact, they said, well, here's you some armor, just go for it. You know, you got this, I guess, whatever you think. But David wasn't scared, but he defeated Goliath alone. He didn't need anybody else to help him accomplish the task. He did it alone. Singularly. The same way Jesus defeated sin, he defeated death and hell alone. he did it by himself. Now that might be a confusing statement if you don't understand that Jesus is God. But since we understand that he chose to come for that purpose and put himself in a fleshly body, and he knew he was going to carry this out, he did it alone. Nobody made him do it, but he did it alone. And in that, he was victorious. And so, if you can see the parallels that I brought out tonight in the story of David and Goliath, and the story of Jesus and his going to the cross to give us the opportunity at salvation, I would just say this to you. We all will and are and do face giants in our life. A giant is something that is overwhelming to you. It is maybe so big and overwhelming that it's scary to you. It feels overpowering to you. It is intimidating to you. It induces fear, and it induces worry in your life, and it induces anxiety in your life if you let it. And if you aren't careful, you're like the Israelite army, and you are doing whatever you can do to avoid facing that giant. For 40 days, Goliath came and he said, "Give me somebody to fight," but nobody was willing to fight. I want to tell you tonight that no matter what you face in your life, and believe me, the last time that I spoke, God challenged me on the topic I was speaking about, and he has done the same thing this time. But I know because it is challenging and because it is hard, that it's true that God means for us to be victorious in every situation and with every giant that we face. We have to change our perspective on how we see giants. We can't look at the giants like the Israelite army as this big, scary, intimidating thing. We have to look at the giant and say, you might be big, but my God is bigger than you are. We have, you know that saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall? Well, the bigger the giant that you face, the bigger the mountain that you have to climb, the bigger and the more awesome and the more glory that God gets when you have that testimony to give. But it doesn't matter what the mountain is. It doesn't matter what the giant is that you face. You are already victorious. God has already written the story. You just have to stick it out. You just have to believe. You have to go into the battle with the perspective of David and say, I've got these 5 stones and this sling and my God, and that's all I need. And I think sometimes as the people of God, we are flesh, so we get wrapped up in our emotions and we don't really know how to deal with things sometimes because we misplace our trust. We don't put our trust in God, and I'm probably like the best at that of anybody in this room. But the truth of the matter is that Jesus intends for you to be victorious in every battle that you face. If David, a small boy, can go into a battle with a giant with the faith to kill him with the first stone that he throws and not wear his armor and not ask anyone else to go with him, then you should know that if God is on your side, you can conquer anything that you face. And that's all I have for tonight. And And I hope that you have got something out of this, because I know that I did, but I just hope that I articulated it well enough for you to get something out of it. So, that's all I have.